Welcome to Wrasslin Raw!
Alright, you're listening to Wrasslin Raw, the podcast that takes you back to when Raw became war and Attitude ruled. Thank you for joining us. You're here with Ryan Arico.
Sorry guys, no Xanta Klaus this year. For real this time. But I do want to wish you both a Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas!
Oh, God. It just gets more disturbing every year.
I think it blew out my headphones this year.
Joe Gimateo.
You've heard of Elf on a Shelf, but have you heard of Xanta Klaus?
I'm the one and only Jason Bartlett, and ordinarily we would be examining WWE history one episode of Raw is War at a time, but this, ladies and gentlemen, is our special Christmas episode. It's that time of the year. Why don't you pour yourself a nice brandy like I have here, or maybe some of your favorite kind of consumable that you might have there, whatever's legal in your state, or country, I should say, and join us around the fire as we talk about a few things over the past year. Some happiness that we got in various forms, various things, such as the gifts we got each other, the Crushmores that we got each other and you, our listeners, and we're going to talk about Bret Hart. Bret Hart's tragic end in the WWF. No, not really. We haven't gotten to Survivor Series yet. That'll be coming up in 2 weeks from this release date, but we are going to be talking about Bret's impact, our favorite Bret moments, and all things Bret Hart towards the end of things here. So, guys, this is what, our fourth Christmas now?
Fifth.
Five times.
It's the King Kong Bundy episode.
Yes.
The Bundy year. The Bundy year. What better way to kick off the first segment here? Our gifts. The Bundy year was just rife with Dave Hebner.
Oh.
We were overflowing with Dave Hebner. Ryan, why don't you start off and fill everybody in on that?
On the Dave Hebner or on what I got?
Either one. I thought that since Dave Hebner was spread so liberally across the Wrasslin Raw team here.
I'll explain it then, yeah. I found someone on eBay who had a rare Dave Hebner referee. He had 2 of them, so I figured perfect. I had to get them both the Dave Hebner action figure. Then I went and found a Jack's over-the-shoulder camera, so we could put those together and smash it up and have the Dave Cam. So my gift to both of them was the gift of Dave Cam.
And it was just miraculous that it came with a camera, too. I mean, my God.
Well, that was the whole punchline.
Mine is displayed in the bathroom.
Excellent.
Nice. Yes, that's exactly where it should be.
It's natural habitat.
Yep.
What else did you get? Now that we've talked about Dave, what were the things that you got there, Ryan?
Well, what I got from you was a awesome official logo of Wrasslin Raw etched onto a whiskey glass, which I am using as we speak.
Hey, me too. How about that?
You also got me an 8x10 of the second most beautiful man in wrestling, D'Lo Brown. So thank you for that. And from Joe, I got a great-looking holographic baseball card of Cactus fucking Jack, along with a Jack's action figure of the Dudester himself, Dude Love. So thank you very much, Joe.
Have mercy.
Joe, what'd you end up getting?
Well, of course, the perverted Dave Hebner action figure. And to go along with that, that was from Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. And to go along with that, I continue my Ladies of Wrestling 8x10s from Jason Bartlett. This year, it was, with a tear in my eye, I will say that it was China this year and signed as China. So
very nice.
Well done, Mr. Bartlett. Thank you.
You are very, very welcome. China and D'Lo are my personal pinnacles so far. I hold the most pride in both of those. Really, both brought a tear to my eye. I mean, beautiful, beautiful pictures of both. Keeping up in that theme of beauty, what I got, we already said I got Dave Hebner and a camera. I also got the Patriot, a little Jack's figure of the Patriot, same build quality as Crush. we used that for some unique posing. The look on the lascivious, degenerate look on Dave Hebner's face lends itself perfectly to some of the poses that we came up with during the gift exchange. And correct me if I'm wrong, Joseph, but we're going to be posting pictures of those on our Instagram feed, right?
Oh, sure. They will be there.
Excellent. And Joseph got me this glorious. Joe, did you say that this was it's like a copy of the full length like poster, like what this would be at like a box office?
I guess it would be what's on the cover of the home video for SummerSlam 1997.
Okay. The Coliseum video.
Yeah,
okay.
Heart and Soul.
Heart and Soul. It's got this fantastic imagery of Bret Hart front and center standing on the Hart Foundation logo and like this purple mist in the background with the Undertaker's like fingers and hands coming out of the mist and his rolled up eyeballs like floating back there. It's fucking awesome. I have a nice frame on the way. It's going to be
nice.
Delivered. I'm going to get that guy hung with the Pog collection here pretty soon. So thank you both.
I forgot to mention, I got one of those wonderful whiskey glasses as well, and I know you have 300 more of those sitting in the garage, so
yeah,
better get those shipped out.
Hey, they fell off a truck.
I've got an in with a supplier, and,
That's what they call it these days,
this quote unquote, I'm doing the finger quotes, supplier. Really, after we found out a couple weeks ago that we had some middle school students tuning into the show, I figured what better kind of merch to generate for anybody, whiskey glasses. Come on.
Degenerate.
You got to learn sometime. That's delicious. Tastes better coming out of that glass.
By the way, do not drink underage, ladies and gentlemen. Do not drink underage.
Sounds like you were just sucking it right out of that glass there.
I was. I can't help but lift it to my lips, much like Vince McMahon lifting Shawn Michaels' bulge. So, we talked about toys. What's up next? Oh, Mount Crushmores. This has become probably my favorite holiday tradition of all of them. I mean, I'm including like my family in that. No, I'm just kidding. It's gotten to be a challenge, and I say that in a fond way, because how do you come up with things for the Mount Crushmore list that are kind of off the wall? You're not repeating yourself, you're not repeating what others have said, So just to bring our listeners up to speed, you may have heard, if you've listened to other wrestling podcasts, the talk that goes on about Mount Rushmores. It's a common question that's asked by interviewers to wrestlers and various wrestling talent. Who is your Mount Rushmore of fill in the blank? So on a Mount Rushmore of managers, you would maybe see Paul Bearer, Jim Cornette, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Sable, we'll say. So in that spirit, we here at Wrasslin Raw, we go with the Mount Crushmore. And like all things Crush, it is subpar. It is only 3 nominations to hit the Mount Crushmore.
Comes up just a little short.
Always leaving you wanting just a little bit more. Besides that, I mean, it's pretty wide open what we can do here. We can have our bests, we can have our worsts, we can have our personal favorites. We've got a lot of latitude there. So I can't really remember where we're at in the rotation here, but did anybody want to jump in there and go first?
Sure, I'll go first, I guess.
Okay.
All right, well, I guess to start off, my top 3 is my 3 favorite heels of all time. Now, this is, of course, not including people that were great heels, but were more known for babyface, like Undertaker, Stone Cold, The Rock, people like that. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people, that would be upset over this list because they'll say things like, how could you not put Ric Flair on this list? Spoiler alert, Ric Flair is not on my list. But I didn't really watch WCW, and I stopped watching WWE around 2005, so these are heels that I am familiar with and loved. To start off the list, number 3, Irwin R. Shyster, IRS. I know, right? I mean, he probably wouldn't make many people's top lists, for sure. And when we watched him for this podcast, he was kind of over the hill at that point. His work was pretty boring for the most part. Let's be serious. Lots of abdominal stretches and arm bars is what we got out of him. Nothing too exciting. And that's why he's listed as number 3. You know, there's a reason for that. But he's on my list for a personal reason, because when I think back to my youth and when I first started watching wrestling, he is the first heel that I remember just really hating. And every time I saw his face, I just wanted to fucking punch it so bad, you know? And it's such an important part of a good wrestling match, is to have someone that the crowd wants to see the baby face just throttle. And IRS was definitely that. So for introducing me at a young age to the true meaning of the word heel, I thank IRS and place him as my number 3 favorite heel. Number 2, Triple H.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he would make most people's top list, and for good reason. And I believe he won my best entrance list a couple years ago. He was my top list on that. But if you grew up watching the Attitude Era WWF wrestling, it's impossible for him to not be at least on your short list of heels. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, the game iteration of Triple H became one of the greatest heels the company has ever seen. He had great feuds with Stone Cold, The Rock, The Undertaker, and of course my old-time favorite, Mick Foley. And that's the main reason he made my list, you know, some of the battles that he had with Mick. And funny enough, rewatching all this stuff, it started all the way back during his Blue Blood days, his awesome matches with Mick. So when they got together, it was just absolute knockout matches, you know, and I think without a doubt that Triple H is one of the best wrestling heels during the entire Attitude Era, because I don't know a single person that grew up watching wrestling from this time who doesn't think of Triple H when they hold a bottle of water in their hand. That's all I got to say. And number 1, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. How could it be anyone else?
You mean Mr. McMahon?
Well, it could be no one else. I did tip my hand a bit in my number 2 pick when I said that Triple H was the best wrestling heel during the Attitude Era, and that's because Mr. McMahon takes the throne easily in my book as the best heel. Now, granted, we ragged on Vince since we started this with his shitty commentary, but when it comes to his character of Mr. McMahon, it is a completely different story. It may have been born out of necessity and them trying to pivot from the Bret Hart screwjob incident, but regardless of how the Mr. McMahon gimmick came about, it was pure gold, and it really couldn't have happened at a better time. Your rising star, Stone Cold, just had a serious neck injury, and he needed an adversary that wasn't going to challenge him in the ring or really challenge him physically at all. They couldn't have found a better person than the cocky, snarky, billionaire owner boss, Mr. McMahon. The embodiment of everything the average Joe hates. And Stone Cold being there as the constant foil to Mr. McMahon's plans is some of the most entertaining segments that ever happened in the ring. And together, they absolutely dominated the wrestling world. To further hammer home that point, when the dust settled in the real world, Vince McMahon, CEO of WWE, gobbled up every single one of his competitors. ECW, WCW, they were both his by the early 2000s, and the Monday Night Wars were over. Won by the real-life heel, Vince McMahon. As I said, there could be no one else.
What a maneuver.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you think this, not to take away from your number 2 and 3, but I think the distance between number 1 and 2 is quite large.
Well, the number 1 was a very personal one. That was what I said, you know.
But I just think Mr. McMahon is just by far the greatest heel ever. I mean, I could never do a top heel list because I would list Vince number 1, probably Stephanie number 2, and then Shane number 3. So.
Well, Joe, what did you get us then?
Well, I am going to give you, I kind of stayed within the Wrasslin Raw time frame again this year. I'm going to give you the top 3 people in wrestling who I thought were really great when I was a kid. But as an adult, I no longer think they are so great.
IRS might have fell into that category for me.
Well, I do want to give a disclaimer. The Ultimate Warrior is not on my list. And I still, if you go back to my list last year, I did my favorite WrestleMania moments ever, and Hulk Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6 was my favorite one ever. So yeah, people can talk shit and make hit pieces and shitty documentaries about Jim Hellwig all they want, but I will stand by the fact that I thought the Ultimate Warrior's original run was awesome. So he is not on my list. So to start off the list, number 3 is ring announcer Michael Buffer. And you may be thinking, wait, why is he on a wrestling list? Michael Buffer was a household name as a ring announcer for the big boxing matches in the 90s. But WCW utilized Michael Buffer for almost all of their pay-per-views and several of their top card matches on Nitro.
And he is such a douchebag in real life, that guy.
I remember thinking Michael Buffer was so cool during those big money boxing matches. I used to think that he was great on the WCW shows back in the day, but watching now, he kind of sucks. And WCW probably overpaid for him.
That's
Yeah,
right? Okay.
Well, you're gonna have to edit that out.
Oh yeah.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. He once announced Bret the Hitman Hart as Bret the Hitman Clark during one of the events. And I will not dare say his catchphrase here because he'll come after even our pissant little podcast. And I am not joking. So fuck him. He's number 3.
Just in case people listening are wondering, the bleep during Bartlett's talking was that,
Yeah.
so we didn't get sued.
I came close to fucking it up there, but we salvaged it.
So number 3 was, I guess, kind of my surprise pick. Number 2 and number 1 should be no surprise to our regular Wrasslin Raw listeners. Number 2 is Earl Hebner. For some reason, Earl was the guy back then. You know, when I was watching as a kid, as a teenager, I knew Earl Hebner's name. I didn't really know the name of the other referees. He was the guy. But watching now, he doesn't even pretend to call a match by the actual rules. He's a really shitty actor. Can't take bumps at all.
And he's a wiener. Don't forget that.
He's a wiener. He's even gone on record claiming that the screw job was a worked angle, I think, a couple times. We saw 2 instances this year in 1997 where wrestlers were better referees than Earl Hebner, Ken Shamrock and Shawn Michaels. So this most recent Hall of Fame induction, I was sweating profusely when I saw that WWE was inducting a referee into the Hall of Fame for the first time ever. But thank Friar Ferguson that it was Tim White and
good.
not Earl Hebner.
Yeah, good.
And number 1, Ahmed Johnson. This guy.
This fucking guy.
This guy had a rocket strapped to him immediately. So, I don't blame my younger self for hopping on that rocket and cheering on Ahmed Johnson.
I mean, we saw it for ourselves. I mean, the crowd bought it hook, line, and sinker for a little bit.
Oh, yeah. But he's just a shitty wrestler. He's a shitty promo guy. He has no sense at all of timing or delivery in or out of the ring. And there is not one single person who has a nice thing to say about him.
Lying scumbag.
In fact, people in the business go out of their way to call this guy a scumbag. So
multiple
Ahmed
times.
Johnson. Ahmed Johnson, the winner of my list here.
That's fantastic.
And that's pretty fucking solid too, because I'm right there with you, Joe. Whenever I was younger, I loved Ahmed Johnson, but now he doesn't exactly stand up. All right, guys. So I had to think long and hard about this because I wanted to put a good amount of effort into this year specifically. Dialed it in a little bit last year, but something just kind of came to me the one day. So anyway, I've got a little preface here. As we all know, I have a habit of bitching about Sable. The various ways that I find her to be objectionable. I hate having her on my screen. Now, the unfortunate part about this is that she was obviously a ratings grabber. Men of all ages lined up to get a potential glimpse of just a nipple Just that little bit of side
Some
boob.
side, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it probably gave WWF the biggest ratings boost that they'd had in months. And despite her robotic delivery and all of the charisma that her bolt-ons could get her, she succeeded in being one of the first divas in the WWE. We've talked about this before, and I more or less hold up Sable, Marlena, Sunny as the beginning of the serious TNA, that stands for tits and ass, for any of the kids out there, phase of women's involvement in the talent portion of WWF. We talked about this way back whenever we were going over Alundra Blaze and Bull Nakano at, what was that, SummerSlam 94. They were one of the match of the year candidates. There's this sea change in wrestling where it becomes more about TNA. Well, it's the Attitude Era. It's this era where a female talent could get away with being much more than a valet, but still less than a wrestler. So what I got you all is my Mount Crushmore of Attitude Era divas that are just plain better than Sable. For the sake of this conversation, I'm defining diva as someone that primarily was hired to be eye candy and used in storylines. I don't consider people like Chyna, Ivory, Miss Jackie to be divas because they were female wrestlers first. Lita, exactly. Because, my first thought goes to Lita. I was always a huge fan of Lita.
Right. I knew you were a huge Lita, Mark. So.
Yeah. But she was a wrestler first before she got into some of that other, the TNA stuff. And, you could make the argument that Sable and Marlena eventually wrestled, but it wasn't their primary purpose at the start. And I'm also just not including Marlena and Sunny in this because we all know that they're better than Sable anyway. So anyway, divas of the Attitude Era that were better than Sable. Number 3, Ryan Shamrock. Ryan Shamrock's real name, Alicia Webb. She performed in the WWF in 1999 as Ryan Shamrock.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that was not Ken Shamrock's real sister?
God damn it.
Swerve,
all these years.
Bro.
All these years.
Swerve, bro.
Next you're going to tell me Kane isn't related to The Undertaker.
Yeah, really.
He does have his dentistry license, though. In 99 and 2000, in WCW as Symphony, which was new info to me. Like I stopped trying to watch WCW by that point, but I never knew she was in WCW too. Her gimmick was that she was the younger sister of Ken Shamrock, that snap-happy, gassed-up freak, which led to plenty of opportunities for people to mess with her, therefore trigger Ken. Ryan Shamrock debuted on our screens January 11th, 1999, but wasn't officially introduced until January 25th by Val Venus as his co-star in the porn Saving Ryan's Privates. The WWF really loved the overprotective brother angle throughout Ryan's short tenure. This led to stories with Val Venus, Goldust. At one point, she was sacrificed by The Undertaker. She finished things out with the diva stable Pretty Mean Sisters. That's PMS. With Jackie and Terry. Ryan Shamrock, she was released from the WWF 7 months after her debut, so July of 99. In 7 short months, she was better than Sable. All of Sable. Number 2, Tori Wilson. Yeah, Tori Wilson is actually her real name, and she was a fitness competitor, winning Miss Galaxy in 1999 before joining WCW from 99 to 2000. She debuted in the WWF as part of the Invasion angle along with other WCW talent. In WCW, Tori came in to work stories with David Flair and then Billy Kidman, and then in the Invasion storyline when WCW merged with the WWF. After the merge, Tori's character was one of Vince McMahon's lascivious affairs, and went on to have many different stories revolving around relationships and sex, culminating in the Playboy evening gown match at WrestleMania 20. That wasn't the end of her time there, but in my opinion, that was the pinnacle, seeing as how Tori kind of fell back in the rut of being just a sex symbol plot device after that. Tori appeared on TV up through her, quote, retirement in 2008, but she, appeared sporadically after that, including getting inducted into the WWF Hall of Fame in 2019, and her last appearance up to the present, as of this recording in the WWF, came on March 31st, 2023, when she inducted Stacy Keibler into the WWF Hall of Fame.
One of my favorites of all time there.
I knew she was. When it comes to the blonde bombshell aesthetic, Tori Wilson, light years better than Sable. And finally, my number one. Oh, I got to get a drink for this one. It's just so damn satisfying. My number one, Stephanie McMahon.
Oh, God.
So, Stephanie is obviously famous for owning and operating the WWF along with her father Vince and husband Triple H, but Stephanie started on screen as the innocent young daughter of Vince McMahon, getting swept up in the Undertaker's ministry story. She had a romance with Test, eventually was drugged, abducted, and married to Triple H in a Vegas drive-through wedding. Breast implants entered the equation at some point.
It's Vince with tits.
It is. In 1999, one of the main stories in the company was the McMahon-Helmsley faction, where she and Triple H ran the WWF. She was eventually in a love triangle with Triple H and Kurt Angle, and then a power player when Linda McMahon was comatose in a wheelchair following a divorce request from Vince. Stephanie participated in stories where she owned ECW, she was general manager of SmackDown, general manager of Raw, and all throughout this, sex was a heavy part of her angles. Stephanie's good looks, well-executed plastic surgery firmly placed her in the category of Attitude Era Diva. Stephanie ended up being a WWF Women's Champion. She's a Slammy Award winner. She's gotten multiple awards in both Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the Wrestling Observer newsletter. My favorite being Stephanie as the winner of Observer's 2001 Most Disgusting Promotional Tactic Award for when she compared Vince's steroid indictments to the 9/11 terrorist attacks in a televised promo.
Man.
So, in every measurable way possible, Stephanie McMahon is a better Attitude Era Diva than Sable could ever hope to be.
One of the best slappers in the business,
yes.
too.
Yeah.
She fucking paintbrushes people.
But the real question is do women want to be her?
You know, I hate to spoil your list a little bit, but your number 2, Tori Wilson, you are aware that she posed in Playboy alongside Sable.
And showed her up with every CC available.
You cover up Sable when you're flipping those pages.
Yep.
Well, you gotta hold the page somewhere, right?
That's right. Love me some Tori Wilson. Loved all these people.
Poor Sable. Poor Sable. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, she's a piece of shit. So, all right. I greatly enjoyed putting this list together. It was like a light bulb moment.
Is that Brock Lesnar I hear knocking at your door?
Yeah.
We've had visits from Ken Shamrock, Brock Lesnar. So the final part of our Christmas spectacular here is going to be talking about Bret Hart. Our listeners, you haven't received the 1997 Survivor Series episode yet, and this may be a teensy bit of a spoiler, but it's the end of Bret's career in the WWF. I won't tell you what happens. I'll leave that surprise up to you guys to watch it. But suffice it to say, with that coming in a very large pay-per-view, one of the big 4 of the year, we didn't really have time to talk about it as part of the bigger discussion of the pay-per-view. We wanted to talk about it here. I think I'll get things going by just throwing it out there. Bret versus Owen at WrestleMania 10. Bret versus the 1-2-3 Kid on Monday Night Raw.
Absolutely.
Bret versus Shawn Michaels. Do we have any other superstars in the WWF that have had, and that's not even touching the Austin stuff.
I was just going to say, the Austin
do we have
match.
Any other superstars in the WWF that have racked up so many match of the year candidacies?
I think not, right? I mean, there's no other way to put it. It just really sucks that he isn't going to be here anymore. You know, he says it himself, and it's pretty much true. He's the best there was, the best there is, and the best there ever will be. At least one of them, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's, it's good you touched on that. I think, unfortunately, everybody loves talking about the screw job. Anytime you get some documentary on Bret Hart, it's going to include the screw job. But his legacy for me is just classic matches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even ones that we didn't even get to cover. There was a match with Mr. Perfect in SummerSlam 91. There was British Bulldog, SummerSlam 92. And then all those ones you listed. I mean, that match with 1-2-3 Kid, that happened in what, 93, 94?
Yeah.
And it's still probably in the top 3 matches on Raw ever. And that show's been on for 30 years.
That's what I was just going to say. I mean, it is still probably the best Monday Night Raw match that we've covered so far. I mean, it's an absolute classic.
Yeah. Kevin Nash has gone on record saying his best matches were with Bret. Stone Cold Steve Austin, I mean, as far as quality of matches, his best ones were with Bret.
It's pretty much impossible to think of early 90s WWF and not immediately think of Bret Hart.
Yeah.
Probably the last best match he had, the Stone Cold one, the double turn, will probably go down as one of the greatest moments in wrestling history ever. It's just, it's that iconic.
Yeah.
I think one of the big things with and I don't know if you're going to ask any questions about that, Bartlett, but like one of the big things with the aftermath of the screw job is the question of what if Bret did stay, like how would that have gone? But I mean, part of me thinks like even when he was a heel, the Hitman character has a lot of wholesomeness to it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure it would have translated well into some of the Val Venus stuff and all the other craziness that happened later.
And thinking about this, one of the things I came up with is, obviously, like you just stated, everyone always has to think what could have been had he been there during the Attitude Era. And, there's one branch of that storyline where you could say maybe it would have been worse because the amount of pull and respect that the Hitman had, he might have been able to influence some of the actions to not be as graphic, not be as adult oriented simply by him being in the locker room. So he might have hindered it, possibly, being as great as he is.
So that actually brings me to the question that I had thought about asking. We have, this isn't just a storyline in the WWF at this point. There is a concerted effort to move towards more reality-based wrestling. That strategy proved itself in WCW. The WWF at this point in 1997 is trying to catch up to that. And unfortunately, with some of the way that some of these stories have played out, and I mean, this isn't all Bret's fault at all. I would assume that he had a good enough part of creative control, not total, obviously, that's all Vince McMahon, but it came to look more and more like Bret was a teensy bit of a holdout from days gone past, which then brings me to WCW. And rather than talk about or maybe ask about what could have been in WWF, let's talk about what we know for sure happened in WCW. He didn't fit in. And again, booking problems. It wasn't entirely Bret's fault, but I think maybe he brought with him that attitude, mentality of the old school, which, granted, helped create these magnificent matches throughout his career that, I mean, we could talk about forever, just in terms of Match of the Year candidates by themselves. But in the, we'll say, reality era of wrestling here in the late 90s, a good match wasn't necessarily the selling point that it was 6 years ago, So I wonder, and because I've said it before, I'm not that big on WCW. Joe, can you give just like a quick bullet point of what happened to Bret in WCW after he left the WWF?
Well, I think that Bret Hart is, a lot of times back then, he was his own worst enemy because he didn't want, when he was originally offered crazy money to go to WCW, he didn't want to go there because he hated Hulk Hogan, he hated Ric Flair. But he doesn't want to stay. He doesn't want to stay here and work with Shawn Michaels because he hates Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
I mean, from all accounts, Vince pretty much was like, you're not staying.
Well, eventually they got there, yes. In my opinion, he should have gone to WCW when he was first offered the WCW deal, but he didn't want to go because he hated Hulk Hogan and he hated Ric Flair. So when he gets there, there's that mentality already. Plus, he just went through the screw job, so mentally he's probably just a mess. Eric Bischoff has said that Bret Hart was a shell of himself when he came to WCW. So, it's probably a little bit of 50-50, I think, with what happened there.
what I remember from watching him at WCW was, you had Scott and Kevin. They came over a year and a half earlier as the outsiders, but he really looked like the outsider when he showed up. He didn't fit in. It didn't look like he wanted to fit in.
Yeah.
The culture was different. It just looked like him and the WCW were on two different pages, and it was just a match made in hell.
And he was by himself. I mean, his
Yeah.
whole family is
Yep.
still over
Yeah.
in WWF. So yeah.
And then Goldberg. Let's not forget about Goldberg.
Now that we kind of have that capper on where he ended up, I wanted to also just to ask you guys briefly about where he was before we started this podcast too, because if we're only looking at Bret Hart in the lens of Wrasslin Raw, that starts in January of 1993. Bret had, correct me if I'm wrong, close to 10 years with the WWF prior to that, right? Him and the Anvil came in as the Hart Foundation in, I think, 84, or well, early to mid 80s, somewhere right around in there. But Joe, you touched on it earlier. There are tons of classic Bret Hart matches that were held and still hold up to this day, along with the ones that we got to see. But it kind of felt like, as a second generation wrestler, as one of the guys, well, probably the first second generation wrestler to have his father screwed in public by Vince McMahon. I think Jerry Jarrett got that later on after Stu, but can you really blame Bret for having a chip on his shoulder going into the 90s? The way that things worked out for him as a single. I mean, let's look at the first time we really saw him in big action, 1993, WrestleMania 9. With the bullshit with Hogan and Yokozuna. It seems like, or at least it feels like, we never got a chance to see the fully realized second generation wrestler Bret Hart. What we got to see is the start of the decline and the start of the bitterness and the screwing that would sink in on Bret over the years, because it wasn't as acute as it got later on, but there was some bullshit in the early 90s for Bret in the WWF, despite being the golden boy at the time, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely. Bret, from the moment he came to the WWF, it was clear he was a absolutely fantastic ring worker. But that was the day of the Giants and Hulk Hogan. In the ring with Hulk Hogan, would run circles around Hulk Hogan, make him look like a monkey. You know what I mean? But because of the time, he never got that top spot because Hulk Hogan was there. And that's, to me, the real shame of it is Bret Hart in the early 90s had some of the best stuff we've ever seen. Way, way better than anything Hulk was putting out. But Hulk was always going to be top of the card because people wanted to see the shirt get ripped off and the leg drop happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people tend to shrug it off, but the steroid trial in 1992 was a really, really big deal. I mean, that was the federal government trying to shut down Vince McMahon and his business. So they had to make big, big changes. And one of them was Hulk Hogan had to go for a little bit, and Bret was the guy. Bret was the more realistic looking wrestler that was having those classic matches and building his way up to winning his first world heavyweight title in 92 when that happened. And then for some reason, it seems like Vince never appreciated Bret Hart's loyalty like he did with other guys like Shawn Michaels and Undertaker. Mm-hmm. Just look at the WrestleMania 9 situation. It's like, oh, Hulk's back, so
we'll immediately give it to him. Yeah.
Time to hand it over, Bret. Oh, Diesel's here. Big guy, natural, no steroids. Time to hand it over, Bret. It's like constant. He should have just left for WCW the first time he had a chance.
Shawn Michaels is gyrating his bulge. Time to give it up.
Yeah, the workhorse, and I'm glad you brought up Shawn Michaels there because Bret Horse. I mean, shit. God, the brain is getting to me already, but I don't think I'm all that wrong here. Bret Hart, the workhorse that he was, like you both said, I mean, he carried things, and not only did he carry things, he did it really well. There was legitimacy in looking at him wrestle and thinking to yourself, I can suspend my disbelief enough to think that guy could get a belt. That guy could keep a belt, that guy could just take challenge after challenge. But then you get to the Iron Man match, the time where Vince was just really, really, really balls deep into the idea of Shawn Michaels and yet another screw in the Iron Man match. What was the time after? It was like 2 minutes and 51 seconds, over an hour, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. But in that short, we'll say less than 3 minutes, in less than 3 minutes, it was Hulk Hogan all over again, practically.
Yep.
Yeah. The similarities between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels are uncanny. I mean, they are just, they hate these guys absolutely hated each other, but they were just so similar. You know, they're two guys that are probably not going to land on a lot of Mount Rushmores, but they're going to be right on the outside of it.
So earlier, you said that there's a legitimate question of what would it have been like in the WWF if Bret had stayed. So let's talk now about the 90s. What would the 90s have been like if Bret weren't there? And I mean, the early 90s, these times when we're talking about Bret as the workhorse, who do you think they would have picked to fill in while Hogan had to lay low? Who do you think would have been a placeholder?
Well,
until
we saw it.
along?
We saw it play out a little bit because Lex Luger was Vince's guy.
Yeah,
and it didn't work. It didn't fucking work.
I was gonna say it would just be a revolving door of the next big monster, the next juiced up freak, time and time again until they tried to find one that worked. That's what it would have been.
Do you think that would have, I mean, I personally think it definitely would have sunk them even lower into the shitter.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
It might have been 183 weeks.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to 1995. No, they had Maybell.
Right. He would have saved it all.
They could have pulled it out. All right. Who would have thought that a talk about Bret Hart's career in the WWF would really be an examination of bitterness?
And Maybell.
And Maybell.
If he doesn't get recognized as one of the greatest ever, he will at least be recognized as one of the saltiest ever.
Yeah. And really, I mean, one of the best technical wrestlers, that should just go without saying.
Absolutely.
I am, the things that I am a mark for, Torrie Wilson, Stephanie McMahon, and Bret fucking Hart's technical abilities in the ring. That's a familial trait, I think. Owen's almost as good, but there's something to be said for that, too. We were moving more towards more story-driven plots in the show as opposed to wrestling-driven things. Was there even any room for a technician like Bret Hart in the late 90s? I mean, it doesn't seem like it, right? With WWF and WCW, where were the technicians? Where was the niche that Bret could have fit into? I don't know either.
Yeah, I mean, his shit still holds up, and a lot of guys say that he was an artist and the ring was his canvas, So that's a great way to describe him.
Yep.
And a great way to leave it, because I absolutely agree, and that's probably how I'm going to think of Bret Hart and his time here in the WWF. He absolutely fucking was an artist with the ring as his canvas. That's a hell of a way to put it. All right, guys. You got anything else you want to throw in on Bret Hart, or do you think we're done with this one?
I think it's time to wrap this one up in a bow.
All
Wrap it up. Happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Yeah. So for all of our listeners out there, we're going to be taking a week off to be, with friends and family and doing the whole holiday travel thing. So following week, for your first episode of 2024, you're going to be getting the 1997 Survivor Series. Like I said earlier, nothing really big going on there. Not at all a well-known
run-of-the-mill pay-per-view
bit that features matches with the Truth Commission and Steve Blackman. But yeah, so I think that's about it. Give us a 5-star review. Go out, download us, spread us, love us. Please, God, love us. And tune in to the most festive Monday Night Raw review podcast on the airwaves. So for Joe and Ryan, I'm Jason, and this has been Wrasslin Raw.